So you'd think buying a McDonald's franchise means owning a McDonald's. You pay the fee, you run the store, the profits are yours. Sounds pretty obvious. It isn't how the deal actually works. Here's the part almost nobody understands about this business. Most franchisees don't own the land or the building beneath their restaurant. McDonald's owns it instead. Most people think McDonald's sells burgers and franchise rights. It doesn't, not really. What it actually sells is a 20-year lease, with a restaurant attached to make that lease valuable. This single idea explains one of the most quietly controversial business models in America. You will see how this system was built and the trap hiding inside the lease itself. You will also see the number that proves burgers were never really the product. This is not really a story about hamburgers. It is a story about what happens when the fine print matters more than the sign above the door. Stay with me, because the numbers alone make the real business almost impossible to miss. The cash flow crisis that started it all. In the 1950s, Ray Kroc was expanding McDonald's aggressively across the country. There was one serious problem. Franchise fees alone brought in less than 2% of each store sales. That was nowhere near enough to cover the debt Kroc had taken on to grow. Kroc had personally guaranteed loans just to keep opening new locations. Banks were wary of lending against a young and proven burger chain. A financial executive named Harry Sonneborn looked at the numbers and saw the flaw immediately. He had come from a background in franchise finance and recognized a pattern right away. He saw a company generating enormous foot traffic while barely capturing any of the underlying value. He proposed something that would change the entire business. Instead of only selling franchise rights, the company would buy the land itself. It would build the restaurant, then lease the whole thing back to the franchisee. Sonneborn put to Kroc in blunt terms. The company was not really in the hamburger business anymore. It was in the real estate business, and the burgers just generated the rent. In 1956, the two men set up a separate entity for this purpose. They called it the Franchise Realty Corporation. Its only job was acquiring land and leasing finished restaurants back to operators. How the lease was actually built. Here's the part that sounds backwards until you think it through. McDonald's would locate a site, buy or lease the land, and construct the building itself. The franchisee would then lease the finished restaurant from the company. Rent was not a flat monthly number. It was calculated as a percentage of the restaurant's own sales, often reaching double digits. On top of rent, the franchisee also paid a separate royalty fee and an advertising fee. Each of those typically ran around 5% of sales. The markup on the underlying lease itself could run as high as 40% above what McDonald's paid to acquire it. This structure meant McDonald's got paid before a franchisee ever saw a real profit. It also meant the company's income was tied to the franchisee's performance without sharing the franchisee's downside risk. Real estate experts at the company chose each site using traffic patterns and detailed local data. A strong location made the whole arrangement work in everyone's favor. Franchisees also put down an upfront security deposit before ever opening the doors. That capital often helped fund the next restaurant the company built. The clause nobody notices until it matters. Here's the trap hiding underneath this entire arrangement. Most lease agreements include a minimum rent clause. The franchisee owes either the percentage of sales or a fixed minimum, whichever number is higher. In a bad year, that minimum does not bend. The restaurant can lose money, and the rent bill stays exactly the same. There is a second, sharper edge to the same lease. If a franchisee ignores corporate guidance on how the restaurant should be run, that can count as a lease violation. A lease violation can lead to eviction. That single mechanism gave the company enormous control over how every location operated. Franchisees who wanted to push back on corporate demands had very little room to maneuver. Losing a McDonald's franchise, in other words, is not just a business failure. It can mean losing the physical location entirely, even after years of running it successfully. The lease is not a formality sitting behind the franchise agreement. For many owners, the lease is the real agreement. The franchise contract simply describes what happens on top of it. The number that gives the whole model away. Here is the detail that makes the real business obvious. In a recent year, McDonald's franchise restaurants operated at a margin of roughly 82%. Company-operated restaurants, the ones McDonald's runs itself, operated at closer to 18%. That is not a small gap. It is one of the widest margin differences you will find between two halves of the same company. Running a restaurant directly means paying for food costs, labor, and daily operations. Collecting rent and royalties from someone else running that same restaurant skips almost all of that overhead. Today, roughly 90% of McDonald's locations are franchise rather than company-owned. The company deliberately weights its business toward the side of the model with the higher margin. That side is not the burgers. The company now operates more than 40,000 restaurants across over 100 countries, serving tens of millions of customers every single day. Company-owned stores still play a role. They function as live testing grounds for new products before those ideas reach the franchise network. What franchise ownership actually feels like for the person who signs a lease, the picture looks different. A typical agreement runs for 20 years, with rent tied to sales the whole time. Franchisees are also responsible for insurance, taxes, and daily operating costs. The company controls how the food is made, how the store looks, and how it runs day to day. Menu changes, renovation timelines, and even staffing standards can all come from corporate directives. Deviating from that playbook risks the lease itself. Many franchisees describe the arrangement as running their own business while never fully owning it. The upside can be real. Strong locations can generate significant income over the life of a 20-year term. Many franchisees pass their restaurants down within the same family for generations. The downside is that the safety net belongs entirely to the landlord, not the tenant. The real odds of owning a franchise. In the optimistic scenario, a location sells consistently well above the minimum rent threshold. The franchisee profits and McDonald's collects a steady, growing share of strong sales. In the realistic scenario, a location underperforms for a stretch, and the minimum rent clause kicks in regardless. The franchisee absorbs the loss alone, while the rent floor never moves. Every franchise agreement signed today still runs on the same basic architecture, Sonneborn, designed decades ago. McDonald's did not become one of the most valuable companies on earth by selling 15-cent hamburgers. It became that valuable by turning the lease underneath those hamburgers into the actual business.